Next is we have the ultimate goal of the transformation of the organization. We have the business process reengineering. Our target for information system courses, for instance, is we target business process reengineering for the organization. But this is a challenging task. Sometimes it's easier to implement automation because we know that customers or your employees is really adopting a certain technology because they are familiar with the process, because you just transform the old process to new ones by introducing new technology, or by making it easier for them to do. But in business process reengineering, we need to rethink of the process within the organization to be able to identify new process. So this is a very challenging task for analysts or for managers who will implement the process. But what are the analysis requirements to be able to perform well about business process reengineering? Number one is outcome analysis. This focuses on understanding the fundamental outcome that provide value to customers. So an example of an outcome analysis on my perspective is an insurance company. Here, we look at the customer perspective because it's the process perspective, that's the process approach. We look at the customer side. In the outcome analysis, in my example of an insurance company, example car insurance, because it's easier for me to give examples based on my experience. So, if you perform outcome analysis and you are an insurance company and you are doing a customer perspective, the reason why the customer actually get an insurance aside from regulatory requirements is that they can avail of the services if there are accidents, for example, if car insurance. The outcome analysis might be for an insurance company. They might think that what the customer wants might be to release the insurance immediately once there's an accident. But if you look at the perspective of the customers, it might be that the customers actually want the service immediately after the accident. So looking at that various perspective, if we look at the customer perspective, we know that the real outcome that the customer wants is that the car, for instance, will be repaired immediately. So if you're doing the outcome analysis, what is good with the process is that you might partner with a repair company, and once the customer actually have an accident, you can immediately proceed to the third party that you have identified to give service to the customers. So that means that by doing the outcome analysis and by looking at the customer perspective, we need to identify what's the real outcome that the customer wants. To emphasize more on this outcome analysis for me, because this is very important, that you get the outcome perspective from the customer, so that you need to realize what services actually they need, or in what perspective they are actually coming from. Another is in enrollment system, balik-balik na siyang example. In an enrollment system, there is a requirement to get a birth certificate. So actually, the reason why the students want to get a birth certificate, for instance, at the Philippine Statistic Authority, is that to submit that document somewhere else. But on the perspective of the PSA, they think that their customer wants to get the birth certificate. But in the educational institution, for instance, the reason why the student want to get a birth certificate is it to be approved or submitted to other agencies or in the university. So on that perspective, you might think of something else to do to get the real outcome that the customer will be doing. So that means outcome analysis doesn't limit on the processes within the organization, although you might not be able to implement it if you consider outside the organization, but at least you think on the perspective of the customer. The second is the technology analysis. starts by having the analysts and managers develop a list of important and interesting technologies. Technology analysis is just a survey of various technologies and how they might be able to support your existing business process. So we will go back to the PSA requirements of students of submitting a birth certificate. I have shared this before to some of my students. In the technology analysis, if a technology can support that a university can view the, the birth certificate of the students within the university, and the students need not to go to the PSA to get a birth certificate, but if the PSA can provide a technology that can allow university to view the birth certificate, then that requirement would be eliminated in the using the technology analysis. So the reason why we perform the technology analysis is to exploit existing technology to be able to improve the existing process or to change the existing process. And lastly, we have activity elimination. This is to eliminate some of the activities. We assume that every activity is actually associated with cost or delays or time. So one of the target of the business process reengineering activity is to eliminate some activities or tasks. So here we try to eliminate some process. Actually not sometimes it's not totally eliminating, but to transfer that process that in the perspective of the customer, it might be done. So for example, in the enrollment system, you don't need to um, to let the students, for instance, to think that they will go to the dean's office for the signature, but they are only facing the advisor. And after they face the advisor, maybe the next process is payment. But now, since it's free, it might be not payment, but the COR. So on this perspective, we can eliminate some of the processes and unnecessary processes such as signatures for technical for um, some enrollment system. And there might be other processes, because if we think of the enrollment system, the target is just to record the enrollment of the students and give them subjects. What's the target of the majority of the enrollment on the perspective of the registrar is to get a certificate of registration. The reason why there are signatures in the enrollment system is that because in IIT, for instance, we need to produce a certificate of registration after enrollment, but that's not always true. The target of the enrollment system or the registration system is to register the students, and certificate might be another matter. So there might be other activities that we need to remove, since we just need to identify our target from the perspective of the customer and from the perspective of the organization. But the activity elimination is to target is to and the purpose is to eliminate activities, unnecessary activities at the point of processing during when the customer is present. Another perspective is that there might be back office processing. That means we limit the interaction of the customer to the organization, because we want the back office to process other requirements later. So that means if we do an enrollment system, for instance, in IIT, the student might be just to submit the requirements, and after that they will receive everything in email, any confirmation or any other processing. So we have realized this one when we conducted the enrollment system online also. Sorry. So we have select a technique based on the following. So we have when you perform those various processes, on the other hand, you have also to think of potential business value, the project cost, the breadth of analysis, and the risk associated with change. Because every change, every introduction of a new technique to the organization, there might be other costs associated with it, especially if for example, if you're a consultant to the organization, and you need to determine the level of analysis also that need to be performed, because some of the the process owners actually don't want to be disturbed. So you must have understand the processes from the perspective, and yet you need time to be there to observe for them. So there are other associated costs in performing this change to the organization. So why do we need to improve the process? They are the part of the business design that provides the most differentiation and potential for competitive advantage. This is the real target as a manager or um, as a manager or someone that wants the organization to improve and to achieve competitive advantage need to do differentiation. So if you differentiate, hopefully lower cost also with your processes, that's one competitive advantage, that you can reduce the cost of the process within the organization, and that's a one advantage with you. Second is process improvement. Reengineering is the only opportunity to reduce cost significantly without reducing output or quality. And sometimes we improve the quality because we do improve and re-engineer our existing process. Lastly, technology directly supports process so that the process improvement is the best way to take advantage of new technologies. So given we have realized this during pandemic, that technology is very important, and some of the processes actually in the organization can actually change or improve through the use of technology. But we didn't realize this during our face-to-face interaction or during our when we physically work in the organization, because during the pandemic, organizations need to rethink their process. So even if it's not really organized in a way that has been introduced here, but at least we take time to think to be able to continue our services despite the pandemic through the use of technology. The goal of the business in managing processes is good measure of performance. And it's also important here is the role of people in their processes. You have realized sometimes that there are a lot of studies on technology acceptance. It's because people are hesitant to use technology. Lastly, process ownership must be seen as an additional or alternative dimension of the formal organizational structure. So this is a challenge to existing organization, that instead of thinking it through functional units, we need to think also that it might be good to have the process perspective of the organization. Although I don't recommend for government organization to do with the process ownership as a formal organizational structure, but we need to consider that sometimes there are processes within the organization that requires a process perspective. For government organization, for instance, the one-stop shop is a concept derived from these concepts that we don't need the customers to go to the different departments, but they can go to a certain place. And that's one way of looking at the process within the organization. Okay, so I hope that you have learned something from this lecture. I will so hope to see you next week for our discussion.